Okay, everybody, we're ready to get started. If you'll take your seats. Thanks for your patience. Okay, well, thank you for coming to our mini course. The topic is Translating at Babel, Church Leadership in the Public Square. My name is Reverend Rich Tafel. I'm the pastor of the Washington, D.C. Church. And if you know what the spiritual meaning of Babel is, which I was going to be talking about today, it marks a period of confusion at the end of an era. So what we experience today with people suffering from COVID who are doing AV and other issues are all examples of the time that we're in. We're in a time of Babel. It'll be a time of confusion. And so it sort of sets the stage. Okay. So I'm going to be making a case today that in our world right now, that to be a peacemaker is to become a translator. What we're doing to overcome our differences in our democracy in the United States right now is not working. I don't need to tell you that our democracy is in crisis and that saving democracy is going to be, I think, the most crucial struggle of our time and the most important. Why? Why not climate change? Why not my issue, abortion, or other issues? Because if we can't solve things peacefully, those other issues cannot be addressed. And the more complex the problem, the more impossible it will be to get anything done if we cannot get along. The photographs here are of the insurrection on January 6th, and the new photo is yesterday at the Supreme Court after the abortion rights. So Washington, where we live, has been kind of in a state of constant turmoil, even navigating tanks on the streets during the period of the riots and then the insurrection. So I believe what we're engaging in right now instead of finding ways to agree is what I would call cultural trench warfare. And if you remember trench warfare from World War I, two sides are pitched on each side, and they measure success by moving a little bit this way and a little bit that way. Nobody wins except the people supplying the guns. And in our politics today, we are all in a trench warfare where we believe that our side, our trench, if the enemy overruns us, if we lose everything. And that means every election is life or death. And so we must fight in our trench for everything we believe. Trench warfare is not interested in persuasion. It is not interested in dialogue. It's interested in completely defeating our enemy. The only way to achieve what we want to achieve is by destroying the opposition. And that's what the two political parties are saying to their followers, that everything is always a crisis, everything is urgent, and you need to support us if the barbarians are at the gates. Both parties are saying the same thing. If they win, we will be destroyed. And so both sides are in a sense of fear, and it's creating a political leadership class of people who are catalyst for confrontation and trouble. They will come into that environment. So you'll be told we need to have supermajorities. We have to have supermajorities in the court, and this battle will go back and forth. We'll measure it in little bits of ground. But that is not the solution for solving our problems in our democracy. Eventually, in a cultural warfare where we're debating ideas this way, eventually we begin to hear the justification of using violence to solve our side because our way of life is at stake. If they win and we lose, then it may have to come to violence. And violence is justified. Violence is justified in that case because we're fighting. It's good versus evil, and our opponents are evil. Right now, people in both political parties have said in majorities that they wish and hope that people on the other side would die out for our side to reach what we need to do, which is good. So that's a very dangerous precedent. We're losing our ability to persuade. We no longer are interested in the democratic process of persuading. You disagree with me, that's okay, let me make my case and let me hear your side. We're not interested in persuasion. Right now, we're shaming people that we disagree with, we're ignoring people we disagree with, we're avoiding people we disagree with, and we're trying to cancel people we disagree with. All this portends a potential for a civil war. That may sound very dramatic, but if you look at the book How Civil Wars Starts, an expert who studies them around the world has found all the indices that lead to a civil war. We are clicking down through all of them in our country right now. We are at a point where we're somewhat getting close to where the United States was before the first civil war that we had. In his book, Divided We Fall, David French plays out scenarios where states will break away. California will become a different country, or Texas will become a different country. I'm friends with David French, and he did his book tour, and he said what surprised him on the book tour was people didn't say, "That's so far-fetched, David." They said, "Yes, we should. I would love for Texas to break away. I would love for California to break away and be its own state." And that's what we're headed for. And in just the last few weeks, the Texas Republican Party put in a platform plank about succession. And most progressive writers said, good riddance. So we are getting to that point where sides are like, we can't do this anymore. We just have to have a complete divorce. The signs of it, January 6th was a dress rehearsal. It was, I don't need to say much more about that. You all know what I'm talking about. We're seeing a rise in militias, which is a very dangerous side, people with arms and weapons. We just saw an attempt by someone to assassinate a Supreme Court justice, Justice Kavanaugh. We had our House of Representative leaders shot up at a baseball game a few years back. Racial tensions are increasing, and that's a part of this, and we've had people literally targeting people around racial shootings. And the basis of a democracy, the only thing that makes it work, is when you lose, you concede. That's the only way it works. So we're seeing on both sides a refusal to say that the elections were just, and that is these all lead to a potential civil war. So I believe our tradition and faith leaders, but particularly our tradition, can play a positive role. In our tradition of Christianity, we have a unique view of pluralism, we have a unique view of spiritual evolution, and we do abide by Christ's commandment to love our enemy. Maybe you've seen this meme of Jesus teaching to love your neighbor, don't hate others, and someone says in this one, but Jesus, what if they're a Muslim? He says, okay, I'm going to start all over from the beginning. But that's kind of how we are right now. But not them. We got to not them, whoever them is. As I said at the beginning, Babel, in our deeper meanings, in our tradition, marks the end of a confusing epoch. And there's confusion at the end of an epoch. I believe we are in that period right now. We are in a period of Babel. Our tradition is very unique in spiritual teachings, particularly in Christianity, that we have an evolutionary view of spirituality. We believe there are epochs of evolution that are taking place. If you're familiar with our church's language, you've heard things like the most ancient, Jewish, Christian, and a New Jerusalem, or New Church. So that's an evolution taking place in the world. Most faiths don't have that view. But I think it really is a key and important truth that we can help understand our politics. This has a list of other types, but we see this pattern of evolution in all of us. We all went through childhood, we went through adolescence, we go through adulthood. There are cycles, and the world is in a cycle. At the bottom of the list is a theory called integral theory. Integral theory basically talks about how cultures evolve, and it actually matches very nicely to Swedenborgian interpretations of spiritual evolution, and it will guide us in the languages and values that we are seeing in the world today and can help us become translators. This is the list of integral levels of development. They go from archaic, indigenous, tribal, to traditional, modern, postmodern, integral. This will be important, and I'll go into a little more depth, because it offers the value systems at each of them, and these are very different value systems, but these value systems are different languages as well. The key operating systems in the United States right now, as far as value systems, are traditional, modern, and postmodern. And I'll say a little bit more about these. These are literally different value systems, and they could use the same words, but they mean different things. And that's Babel. So words meaning different things, words like patriot, nationalism, family, colonialism, democracy, and diversity. Those words mean something different to someone at a traditional level, to someone at a modern level, and to someone at a postmodern level. So let me explain what these values are. First, the traditional value, and as I'm saying these values, think about people you know and think about parts of yourself that relate to this value. Okay? So the traditional value is very ethnocentric, it's family-oriented, it believes in a faith in God. There's some fear of modernism. It tends to be in the United States more in the rural community. And politically, you'll see it in more on the Republican Party, conservatives, traditional conservatives, but you'll also see it in the Democratic Party, particularly in the African American community, which is another level of complexity. But there are traditional family values. The next level is modern values. This came online under the period of the Enlightenment. The idea here was that science and rationality will lead us, and not so much faith in God, that individualism is important, and it leads to the creation of capitalism and materialism. This value system is dominant among people at the center right and center left of the two political parties. And then postmodern values, which people are less familiar with, but postmodern values are globally centric. While modern and traditional tend to be very national focused, they will look at the whole world, what is going on in the whole world. They see the flaws of modernity and modernism, and they look for the voices of people who have been left out. You know, that story, that narrative of how great the United States was? Well, what about slavery? Well, it wasn't great if you were gay. You know what? Women didn't have a right to vote. It's a critique, and it says, you know, capitalism, it also led to environmental degradation. So it's a critique of the modern world and saying, we're going to be a voice for people who are left out. This value system is very dominant on campuses. I'm sure Jim and Rebecca could give us great insights into this value system. It's very dominant on campuses, and it's generationally, you can see these also tend to be, this is more of a younger generation value system. It's more prominent on the progressive left, but we're seeing it also appear in the populist right. One of the things about postmodernism is it does not believe in truth with a capital T as much. Modernism says there's true things. Here's science, and this is truth. Postmodernism says, this is my experience. That's your experience. And my experience may not mesh with your experience. And this is my truth. And that is your truth. There's no capital T truth. So even phrases like fake news, which you think that's the right, that's a postmodern. There's no news. There's no accurate. Don't trust the media. Don't trust the common sources. Don't trust the government. Don't trust the church. If you're wondering what's going on with our congregations, young people who are postmodern see the church in that modern sense, that it was corrupt, did awful things, and they would be opposed to it. Now these systems, postmodernism is extremely allergic to traditionalism. And traditionalism, as a value system, is very allergic to postmodernism. Modernism is somewhere in the middle, and you can see that there's parts of you in each of these value systems, and you're thinking of political leaders that you've seen who could fit into these. This tends to be more of an urban value system, and it's the rising value system. And could even be, people don't understand just how dominant it is, but it's very dominant, particularly among people under 40. So these three dominant value systems are at war with each other. You've got the pre-modern, or what I call traditional. you've got the modern, and then you've got the postmodern. And it says pre-modern because God put it there, and it would always be. That's traditional. Modern says onward and upwards, and there's an inevitable progress. And postmodern, you get the idea. It's we're not sure about any of it. We are deconstructing. So according to integral theory and according to our own theology, there's a new level, a new value system emerging on the earth. In our tradition, we would say it's the New Jerusalem that's been emerging for 200 years. And in integral theory, it's called the integral level. And I believe these are really two different ways of saying the same thing. This system, this value system, has a unique ability to hold multiple perspectives. It can completely stand in solidarity and understanding of a traditional perspective. It can understand a modern perspective, and it can understand a postmodern perspective, and hold the truths of all these different value systems and say, I see it. Much like the story of the elephant where each person is feeling a part, an integral person could see the elephant and realize that, yes, when you are touching this part of the elephant, that is true. What your experience is true. And that's unique, I think, for our denomination. It has an ability to recognize diverse values and respect, deeply respect. Not respect in the sense of tolerance, but respect in the sense of love. That's a big difference. It's not sitting like a left-right dialogue where I can't stand these people. It's, I love them. They were created in the image of God. And I got to see God in them, and I've got to understand it. In our culture right now, this is the missing element, because we're in a culture that wants to roll the opposition. It wants to play to our base energy of domination. We want to control and destroy what we see as evil. So I believe it's a call for translators, cultural translators. And in the book Uncivil Agreement, the author points out that one of the many reasons we're in a time of great turmoil is we've boiled down our identity into almost one identity, progressive or conservative. And when that one identity reduces our complexity, because it's not really true, we're all very complex. It reduces our complexity. It also means we're quite fragile. If someone destroys that identity, they destroy me. I am my politics. If you want to attack a conservative, you are attacking me personally. We're not talking policy. So my identity is now replaced by generally one thing. And what the book says is going to save us are a phrase that it's an academic phrase, an awkward phrase, but it's used in the academy, cross-cutting cleavages. What that means, I don't know if anybody's ever heard that before, but what it means is people who have, in all of her studies, the author studies, people who have complex value systems can be translators. They are less likely to hate people from the other side. They can see, well, I could see part of myself in that. I could see it. And they're very aware of their own complexity and have refused to be squeezed into a category like everybody else. And another book by Daniel Pink calls them boundary crossers. And this avoiding one identity and saying, I'm one thing. Our denomination is pretty much, if you'd say politically, it's definitely on the progressive or democratic side of things. I would think we've never done a poll, but I'll just say by my experience. But the fact that you're at a church conference gives you a cross-cutting cleavage. It means that you can see a value system in faith in God that many people at modern and postmodern think is ridiculous, particularly if you're talking about, say, Swedenborg, and you say he's a mystic, and they're like, yeah, right. Or as people have said to me, Rich, you're really smart. I can't believe you're a minister. Like that you believe into this mythology of the past because it's so ridiculous. And it's interesting that you cling to whatever you were raised with your childhood, and that would be a cross-cutting cleavage. So the people who have that ability are people who are conservative but live in a city, or people who live in a rural area but are progressive. for example. You see it among a lot of minorities because they've had to learn the variety of languages to survive. You'll see it in the Jewish community. You'll see it in the black community of people who can translate across certain value systems, and gays and lesbians, which is what I want to talk about next, which is my first case study of really an example of the power of these cross-cutting cleavages or diverse identities. The gay and lesbian movement for same-sex marriage is the most successful social change movement in almost American history, if you look at it in terms of time. Many of you know that I was a gay activist and started Log Cabin Republicans back in the early 90s, and I debated gay marriage in the 90s. That at that time, support for gay marriage in the United States is in the 20s, 20%. And in fact, I did a series of debates with the Christian Action Network across the country on gay marriage. And everybody was like, why pick that topic? Because that is such a loser. Like, never in my lifetime, of all the things we'll achieve, that will never happen. Interestingly, little insider baseball, in the LGBT community of that time, the progressive, postmodern gay and lesbian movement did not support marriage. They criticized me for supporting gay marriage. Why? Because marriage was buying into a heteronormative, patriarchal, capitalist model. And they didn't want a seat at that table. They wanted to overturn the table in a completely different way. So it's interesting that it's perceived to be a success, but it was opposed. Why did, if you would look at a chart, gay marriage just hit 70% a few weeks ago of support in the United States, which means in every age group, in every political party, it's gone like this. Why did that go like this, but issues around the environment went like this, down, in that same period? In other words, there was more support, bipartisan support on environmental issues, say 20 years ago, 30 years ago. And abortion rights has also gone down in support. You can see it's at acceptance of abortion at 47%. Why have some social issues gone like this, and why did marriage go like this? And I would make a case based on my experience with it. Because the gay and lesbian community had within it boundary crossers, translators. Gay people were born in every family, every state, every religion, every group. If I ask you now to raise your hand if you know anybody in your family or another family who is gay or lesbian, it's quite amazing. And what happened is when those people came out, particularly in Kansas, in the Midwest, in the South, they challenged a traditional value system, and it was a really tough choice because family is a value and being anti-gay is a big value. So, and these translators, the kids who came out and talked to their parents, sometimes they left, they moved to the city, but they still had something changed in the families. And over time, we saw incredible acceptance. And I believe that the boundary crossers during that movement, the reason it succeeded was groups like the group I did, We Educated Republicans. It's the only issue where conservatives went like that. Families for Lesbians and Gays, PFLAG, that group was very, very powerful because, again, it translated into families. So there were groups, and there was the MCC Church, which you may not be familiar with, but it's the Metropolitan Community Church. And that was a group more on the evangelical side that said, we're gays and lesbians, we're evangelical, we're not giving it up. And they created a whole denomination around it. And imagine that education process. So now we're not just fighting people on the who are on the far left, and this is a far left-right thing. It's people who are talking about faith, people who are in my family, and it became much more complex. And I believe that's why that worked. I gave the title there, What Green Can Learn from Pink, was a title of a presentation I gave to the Breakthrough Institute in San Francisco, which is an environmental group that was puzzled, why are we always losing ground on the environment? And I think the reason is many of the modern movements on social change are using the tactics of trench warfare. We're going to have to roll them or bully them or disdain or criticism instead of persuasion at a level of values. And the gay and lesbian movement uniquely had that built in. Another case study was I was involved with the AIDS crisis. And it operated at a different level for each of the value systems. Now, this is another loser issue if you think about it. When in the early 90s, or in the 80s, as a young gay man, I looked into the paper, in the gay paper, and I saw all these handsome people I knew in their 30s, obituaries. And so I was very afraid, and it seemed very hopeless, because the public pretty much across the board, Democrat, Republican, said, you know what, you made your bed, sleep in it. And we don't care about gay people. And that's absolutely the experience people had. It was a very hopeless situation. And so I became an AIDS buddy, which meant that you visited a person living with AIDS. That was my reaction to fear. My own fear was, I've got to do something. And that meant, delivering food, meeting once every few weeks. Our buddies in the program would usually live about 2 months, and then you get a new buddy. And I was in a support group, and it was one of the most spiritual groups I've ever been in my life. It was really powerful. We had a nun, a Jewish doctor, a philanthropist, a librarian, and we would get together and say, how are you doing? And it was a very dark time. But I've always been inspired by Dietrich Bonhoeffer's quote, where he's a German theologian who opposed Adolf Hitler. And he had a famous quote where he said, when we see a crazy man driving through the town square, hitting everybody with their car, we can bandage the wounded, or we can grab the steering wheel. Bandaging the wounded is not enough. We have to grab the steering wheel. At some point, if you really want change, you have to make systems change. You have to stop treating the symptoms. And so for me, that became, okay, what could I do around this issue? And using these value systems, I didn't know these value systems, but I knew them intuitively at the time, that the traditional value system would look at this as it's bad behavior, and literally said, this is God's punishment. And it made perfect sense. This was a bad group, they came up, now they're all dying. What could be more cause and effect? And that was very prevalent. The modern groups were not all that interested, but they saw it more as a medical challenge. And then the postmodern community that was very nascent at the time saw it as a conspiracy by particularly the Reagan administration and Republicans in corporate America to kill people. So those were kind of the systems. And the one, if you see any movie about how AIDS was addressed, it's very dramatic. The postmodern language was ACT UP. And they had a phrase, silence equals death, and they shut down highways, and they stepped on the host at a Catholic cathedral in New York, and were very visible. And I knew, for me personally, that was not going to be successful as a strategy of winning Middle America over on this issue. I understood the anger, and many of the people were literally frightened for their life, and many of them, of course, died during this time of this protest. Long story short, I engaged in policy change, and that young man, in the 104th Congress, there was only one person from the gay or AIDS community to testify on behalf of AIDS, and I had spent my whole time translating to Republicans in their language about it. And so modern, it's one-on-one persuasion, and it's you have to get policy. You've got to get the new drugs, and you've got to get the funding for people who are dying. And the interesting part of this story for me was, how do you get the traditional community on board for a topic like this? And there was a doctor and a congressman who then later became a senator, Dr. Tom Coburn from Oklahoma. And he was considered maybe the most far-right member of the Congress, but he was also a doctor. And I met with him, and I talked to him as a Christian, so traditional values. I talked to him as a doctor. Whatever you feel about these people, you swore an oath. You have to care about them. He got that. So and then from a postmodern, he wasn't really into postmodern. It wouldn't be a very convincing argument to him. But I did say to him, what if you increase funding above the Democrats' request? Wouldn't that show the Democrats? And so Tom Coburn, Dr. No, who voted against every budget, there was a period where the Republican Congress put more money into AIDS than President Bill Clinton. And in each case of these stories, I know it sounds unbelievable, but it did happen, and it doesn't fit the narrative of what people tell as stories, but that's how eventually we got to passing legislation to fast-track drugs, and we got the funding issues resolved, and AIDS was ameliorated. So those are two case studies I've experienced in my life. In both cases, it seemed hopeless, but by engaging and persuading people in a language that is not just persuasion, but it really is loving the other. It is, this is a person, and if I go in and I can find good in them, can I share with them and educate them instead of I have to crush and destroy them. I believe that our denomination could take a lead in engaging faith leaders in this challenge of translating. One, because of our theology. And we've done things like this before as a denomination. The Parliament of World Religions and other huge things that we're small, but we are a rudder for big ships, and we could make changes. The reason I think faith communities are uniquely valuable here is, first of all, it's one of the last existing communities left in our country that has any diversity of viewpoint. We've sorted almost completely, and most churches have sorted, unfortunately, completely. But I think if we could do trainings for churches, because we believe in loving our neighbor, that is a commandment of Christ, and we have spiritual forces on our behalf that the modern world might laugh at, we all have tapped into in our lives in a very real way, and so we could take a lead on this. So how does this work out at Church of the Holy City, my own little church, a little case study? I'm going to try and see if this video works. But Annabelle Park, our church president here, and Shalonda's in this clip. How do you do it in a church, right? Because without people screaming at each other and running out, right? You all had that experience probably. So what you'll see in this clip that I think is important is people chose to see each other with complexity. If I know one thing about you, I can't write you off. And so let's see if this plays. Maybe it will.
Program in our church, for example, on Sundays, where the sermon and the service is a small part of what is really a discussion. And people need spaces to discuss. They need spaces to meet different people. And churches, for example, or synagogues or mosques, interestingly enough, are one of the last institutions left in the country where diverse people from diverse backgrounds come together.
I was sort of reeling after January 6th, as I know a lot of us were. I was working for an organization at the time that was focused on telling stories about the American dream and really building sort of, again, trying to build bipartisan consensus and sort of trying to reclaim that story of diversity and unity. Rich and I had a really good conversation. I was actually a little bit thrown because I am a little bit of a rabid progressive. And so I, shortly before our meeting, I did the research that I probably should have done before that, and realized that Rich was the founder of the Log Cabin Republicans. It really, it threw me for a pretty significant loop. Church of the Holy City is a really unique community where you can have these conversations about difficult topics like politics, like race, and not feeling like you're being required to think a certain thing to belong in the community.
I want to kind of have the space where we can talk about issues like poverty and civil rights and women's rights and creating peace. Even though Rich is somebody that I don't agree with politically probably about half the time, I felt like he was like modeling a certain way of living. All we can do really for each other is to be good teachers, to be good students, to be good teachers, and to really model what we would like to see in the world.
That the church can offer a contradiction to the things that people are experiencing outside of the church, whether that's virtually or physically. We offer safe space to make content. We offer safe space to contemplate or to host gatherings. And also, we ourselves as a community are a visual contradiction to what is happening in the world. We're people being ourselves in a community of practice. And that has not been the norm for many churchgoers. I hear a lot of hurt and trauma and pain, especially from the LGBTQ community. And for me personally, to have a place where I can face a lot of these contradictions in a conversation with Annabelle or someone who's not like me, or who I may think is like me and I learn that they're not, is very powerful and gives me a sense of stability out in the world to have differences with people and address them with grace.
We created a program.
So what can we do? I think we could do trainings, and I think our denomination is uniquely situated for this. But the first step of any training is that you have to build spiritual resilience for this work. This work is not for everyone. I will tell you, being a translator is like running across that trench, and you will get shot in the back. People on your own side will shoot you, and then people on the other side will shoot you. So you have to have spiritual resilience. We know how it works out historically for peacemakers. Dr. King, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, Jesus. It's not the best advertisement for the role. But since we have a very profound view of what life is, the purpose of life and life after death, but it's tough. It's tough. And you need to build spiritual resilience, because what the public square right now has perfected is toxicity. And what that means is that, imagine you're a political gathering here of a particular party. All I have to do is come into that meeting, or your church, you've experienced this, and be toxic. And you know what people say? I don't want to deal with that person. They were so aggressive. They were so rude. They were screaming. I'm not going back. Guess who gets to run the local political party once they leave? And toxicity works in politics, unfortunately. To be a translator and to go into those situations, you have to be spiritually grounded. People always tease us that our name is Church of the Holy City. And everybody in Washington says, Church of the Holy City? You? Maybe the hellish city? But holy? Are you kidding? Is that a joke? Are you ironic? But we see a very important role for our church to be in that space and offer a different way of being. So you do have to prepare yourself, and it can be very lonely. What tribes make us feel comfortable. It's very lonely to break from the tribe. And so that's just another reality. And so spiritual resilience, I did not know until recently, a young member of our denomination who I knew her parents really well visited, and she's in the Air Force, and she was visiting Washington. And we were talking about how difficult she was having, she was having challenges at work. But she was talking about spiritual resilience as one of the pillars of the Air Force. I had no idea that that's one of the pillars of being in the Air Force. So developing spiritual resilience to go into hell for a heavenly cause, so to speak. And the other step is then, I would say, teach civic empathy, creating a class of translators that can understand the various languages of the value systems that we're dealing with. One great spiritual practice is when you are listening, when you really disagree with someone's opinion on a policy issue, spiritually make their argument better than they do. It's called steel manning. A young leader in this field calls it titanium manning, because he says not only make it better, but with love. So make their argument as best you can in your mind. And that is an exercise that we do in trainings that we do, and it's very powerful spiritually. I've coached and done strategy for many nonprofits on many issues. And a lot of times they'll come in and say, I'll say, you'll need to work with this, and this part of the coalition. and they say, I will not talk to people from that party, and I will not work with corporations, and I will not, and I'll say, do you want to be right, or do you want to accomplish this goal? And I'm not dealing with that. I'm not dealing with them. I'd rather lose the issue than have to deal with them. So that ability to steelman, make an argument for the other side in your mind, is a spiritual discipline. It's hard work. We resist it painfully because we want to be sure of ourselves. And then as we do that, we can speak from both sides. In our own lives, each of us have a traditional value. We have traditional values. We have modern values. I was raised not in the Swedenborgian church, but more of an evangelical Baptist church. I'm very grateful for that now because debating evangelicals for a decade like I did, I wanted to hate them. And I kept remembering my Sunday school teacher, who was very devout, Mrs. Martin, very devout and very far right on every issue. She was a lovely human being. And I got to see that she was a lovely human being. And I would sometimes just picture her as I was dealing with people that I really disagreed with. Modernity, I grew up in a family that believed in science and getting a job and getting a good education and all those values. So I get the modern thing. I'm a capitalist. I like capitalism. And then in my own self, when I went to Harvard Divinity School, for example, graduate school, that was the beginning really of postmodernism on campus. But it was as a gay man, it was a great thing that there was a gay and lesbian group. And, I do think that capitalism has been greedy and has done damage to the earth. And I do personally believe that particularly, voices have been shut out of the system, and particularly, through white supremacy around racism. I believe I can hold all those divergent values, but they would seem like from different systems. And that's why when people sometimes talk to me, they go, you don't sound like a conservative, or vice versa, because I can respect the value systems of where all that is coming from. I do like the integral level, or what I would call the New Jerusalem level, where you can take them all and hold them all at the same time, and then love people in the process. That's a spiritual discipline. So blessed are the translators. They shall inherit the earth. Just read this quote. Don't be daunted by the enormity of the world's grief. Love mercy now, walk humbly now, do justly now. You are not obligated to complete the work, but neither are you free to abandon it. And that's from the Talmud. There is a tendency to want to abandon this work. We want to go back to our comfortable things and just say, all the surveys are showing the largest type of voter right now is something called the exhausted middle. And it's just people say, I want to go back in my shell. I just want to move. I want to put my head down and stay out of it. That is not really for people of faith, we have to step into it. Our faith is uniquely positioned for this. We believe that all faith paths are good. If you've grown up in this, you don't realize how unique that is. Even in ecumenical dialogue that I do, I say to the people in the dialogue, now when you're looking at that Muslim, other person, Jewish, in the back of your mind, you know they're not saved. Is that right? And they're like, yeah. That undermines the ability truly to hear and love, I believe. We have that. We believe that all faith paths are good. We have an evolutionary spirituality. We have this predicted in our teachings that we'd be in this period. We teach that we're here to be useful. We have to ask that. And I think our churches could be doing workshops and take a leadership role on overcoming this divide in the public square. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks. Thank you. Now, I don't know because of the time issues whether there's time for questions now. I think we're a little bit off schedule because I got started late.
What's the next thing?
Lunch. 11:30, 1:30.
So 11:30, 1:30. 2 hours. So anybody who wants to go to lunch can go to lunch, and anybody who wants to stick around.
Yeah, if you have any questions, I'd be happy to ask questions. And what I often do in this situation, people literally come up and say, "This is the issue," that I really care about, and we can walk it through in the value systems and the languages. We won't have time for that today, but that would be a training. We're planning a training hopefully for this fall out on the East Coast, and the first group that we'll invite are all of our Swedenborgians leaders, and then we have a group of other very interesting trainers who have done this kind of work from all over the country interested. So question, now I don't quite know if the mic has to be passed or, maybe I'll repeat the question. Let's do that. That might be the safest way. So first question.
Rich, the training that you just mentioned, will that be virtual or that'll be live only?
We're going to do it hybrid. Yeah, so it'll be virtual and it'll be in person and online. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't repeat the question. The question was the training that I'm talking about that we want to do in DC. Will it be online, open to online? The answer is yes. Yes. Next question.
You need to use the microphone or are you gonna repeat? Available for you to send out?
Yes. Is the PowerPoint available for you to send out? Yes. But I would just ask that we keep it among the people here in the denomination right now, because I'm actually working on a book and there's some intellectual property in there, and I would just like to keep it within our group. And our families. Does it, would that work? Okay, great. Or do you want to hand it around to people? So, yeah, she's going to.
Thank you, Rich. I want to know, how do you advertise that? How do you spread the word to the people?
For these kind of like this kind
Right,
of training?
this kind of a training session.
Yeah. My thought right now is that I would like to target faith leaders first on this, and because that's a leveraged moment. And if we could get faith communities, and I've got a partner in this who's a leading rabbi in Northern Virginia who wants to spread this through the Reformed Jewish community. And so, and we partner with a Muslim group at Church of the Holy City. If we could get various faith groups to get it to their networks, I think one of the secrets for our denomination, because we're small, we often think, oh, how in the world would anybody come to what we're doing or get the word out? And the answer is to partner with other networks. We kind of have the ideas, but they have the networks, and they're extremely interested. And so that's how I would do it. You might even just start in your own church by modeling it, like do some practice runs. We made a point in our Church of the Holy City where I did a series of sermons. Ministers are afraid to preach. And tell me what you want me to preach on. And we had every possible controversial topic. And we got through it. We discussed it. I'm not going to say that everybody has stayed at Church of the Holy City happily. People have walked away because the dialogue is very much respectful. And if you can't be respectful, it's not the right place for you. But you might just try it with your own space, and you might try partnering.
Hi, I'm Lori Turley. A lot of you know me. I haven't been to convention in many years, and I think I know now why I'm here. Thank you so much. My goodness. This is not a question. This is a thank you, first of all. But I also wanted to just share that, and I'd love to talk further with you, Rich. Many of you know I retired a year ago, and part of my retirement plan was to get a little more involved politically, at least at my state level, on issues that are very dear to me. And I just recently lobbied in our Congress, our state, I guess you call it Congress, and we got a bill passed that was very important for mental health parity and funding, that we as advocates actually went to our legislators and talked about. And in the process, I met a Republican senator, and I am not afraid to admit that I am not a Republican, and I have sometimes had those issues, of that divide, who was the senator for my district. And we talked, we reached out to each other. He didn't understand the bill that we were presenting, understood it after I and some others heavily explained it to him. He ended up being one of the people that got in touch. And I just had a Zoom meeting with him just last week because of this very reason. Because, as you know, I get on, probably we all do, but I get on Facebook, and my friends on Facebook, for the most part, share my values and beliefs. And it's all, this side is horrible, and da-da-da, and vote all Democratic, and da-da. And I'm Zooming and sitting and talking with this Republican senator, sharing ideas, because my feeling is exactly that we have to talk with each other. And it was very interesting because he had the same feeling. And he shared with me, and you may already be aware of this group. I had never heard of it, a group called Braver Angels. You're aware of Braver Angels, which is a group that's actually, isn't it based in D.C.?
Yeah, we just hosted a book with them, a book reveal with them and with the Rumi Forum.
Awesome.
They're very much a part of our physical space.
Wonderful. I had never heard of them before last week. I've got my Facebook page open because I put it on Facebook. In Maine, where I'm from, there's an adjunct group called Building Bridges Maine, which is actually having a Zoom meeting tomorrow, so I'm not sure if I'll attend that or not. But I just wanted to say, along with being church members and talking within our churches and within congregations, that I personally, and I'm not going to advocate or tell you what to do, of course, but I have found that reaching out to this one Republican senator has really opened some doors already for me in terms of our state legislature and your local legislators, your state legislators. It's not, you don't have to go to Washington and advocate, before National Congress. That there's a lot of people out there who do want to heal this rift and heal this divide, and they're there. And we do have to just kind of put the feelers out. So thank you so much. This was very timely for me personally, but appreciate it.
Thanks for your work on that.
Ooh, another ditto. Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. I have been anxious and cross with the other side for so long. And I thought, wow, Julie, you're a trained, whatever I'm trained. What am I
Mediator?
trained to forget things?
Mediator?
No, I'm not a mediator, but I trained as a chaplain. See,
Yeah.
I get there eventually. So to me, I was beginning to think, how can I connect with people who think so differently to me? And then Roz and I just sort of said, didn't we do that in chaplaincy? Yeah. I have done it with an ardent person who would never be anything other than Republican. And I found one of the ways to connect was, so why, go through the why, ask questions. Why did you think this? Why did you think that? And to be able to hear her, I love that woman, but she's an ardent Republican. And I'm thinking, how can I do that? Oh, wait, I can be a kind human being who listens to her and her fears, and a lot of it is fear. A lot of people operate on fear, and it's an amazing thing to me. But if we can get beyond the, and say, wait, she really believes this. And how can I connect to her? So I value anything that can do any kind of training to help me understand people so I can get back from my anger and connect to people the way I did when I was a chaplain.
Yeah, thanks, Julie. I'll just note something I've noticed in our own denomination, that we have a lot of, a number of our female ministers particularly are from the general church, and that's a cross-cutting cleavage. And I've noticed that you do not disparage or criticize something that you could feel quite bitter about. And that ability to hold it, you're holding two different value systems at the same time. You're respecting people who, you felt disrespected by. That's a gift. So for all of you who are holding that, you're not, some of you live in the community and so forth. So it's complex. People might look at you, why would you ever, if they did that to you, why wouldn't you get out? But I respect that cross-cutting cleavage, that diversity that you hold within yourselves.
So my question is the integral position. The way you describe it, it doesn't have a way of critiquing other value systems. Like, it doesn't critique other value systems. Is that correct?
In what sense?
It just, so the postmodern is a critique.
Yes.
Okay? So with integral, is it in, and is there a way to do critiques?
Okay, yes.
Does it have its own value
Does it have
system
its own value
that
system?
can critique the other value system? So that's one question. The other question is the exhausted middle the same as modern? And are you, like a modernist, using kind of this persuasion method to try to reach people in postmodern and traditional? Because I feel like, I don't know, I'm just from what I know about your politics, I feel like you're a modernist, but you know how to talk to people with other value systems.
Yeah. So let me. So now, the first question was: does integral at a value level, does it have any critique? Because the other ones, in a way, each of the other systems are critiquing the last one. Traditionalism, which is really Moses, starts with Moses. If you want, it was. We think of those as draconian rules. It was critiquing really a horrible culture, right? And it was a better system. The Enlightenment and science and reason, that was critiquing the weaknesses of traditionalism, particularly around the role of certain people, women, the role of the role of the church in people's lives. So it was a critique. Postmodernism is also a critique of modernism, and saying this grand narrative isn't true, and here's all the things that aren't true about it. So I could see why you would perceive. I don't perceive myself necessarily. I would say I'm more integral because I can see the values of the postmodern, and the critique of integral would say that each of these have truths. I can see the truths in all of these, and I can see the shortcomings that I disagree with in each of them too. And we can take the best from each of these. So a quick example, for traditional, I love family. I love God. I a lot of traditional values, and so my family is very important, my faith is very important. So I have a lot of that. I don't want to lose that in any value system. At the modern level, I love science. I like capitalism. And I like the United States. I think we're a force for good in the world. That's not a popular postmodern position. Postmodern, though I've shared, like I can see the values in myself that have critiqued all the. I wouldn't be a pastor in any church, and I couldn't have been when I first started my path to ministry. Everybody said, you need to marry a woman if you want to be a pastor, which is very, very unethical. So I've lived in a life where the postmodern and the critique of all that. So, but integral would embrace all of them. So that would be, there is a critique, but it's an embrace of the different ones, and you can see it. Even other systems that below I didn't have time to get into, like the warrior level. There's times when you need to be angry. So your second question was more on, remind me.
Is the exhausted middle
Is the exhausted middle
the same as the modern, and that are we using these techniques of persuasion to talk to people in other values?
Yeah, so is the exhausted middle the same as modern? The answer would probably be no, because there's exhausted people at every level. So there's the exhausted people at traditional, and they've just said, I'm out of it. I'm just going to move off and live rural, and I don't want anything to do with the United States. There are people at modernity who are your more urban, sophisticated, well-educated, generally, who are like, I don't even want, at a dinner party, just don't talk politics, or I'm not going to say a word about that, and just keep my head down. At postmodernism, if you talk to anybody who's under 30, they will tell you that they're afraid of being canceled, that they're keeping their head down, that they don't want their career destroyed. So what a lot of faculty are telling me on campuses is debate has been squelched on campus. People don't debate in class anymore because you say the wrong thing, and that could be a career ender. So particularly certain categories of people are more afraid, and so they're exhausted. They're already exhausted, and they're in their 20s and teens. So I think that exhausted middle makes up. And who isn't the exhausted middle are people who are in the most partisan, polarized position, and they will justify supporting anybody if it means their side wins. Whatever we have to do, and it's tilting toward. Those folks are tilting toward even violence in their rhetoric. Sometimes violence is an appropriate thing we have to do, And you'll hear on the right from people who would be called conservative saying, I no longer think that we can solve these issues through the political system. That's a fair warning to us that, so get your guns. They would say that. But you're hearing similar things on both sides in those extremes. But so that's I think where the exhausted middle is. Yes.
Oh, hi. Thanks, Rich. I mean, what an amazing presentation. Also, thanks for the work that you've been doing for years, obviously. I mean, I really didn't ever meet you until this past week. But to hear your presentation and some of the concepts that you're presenting are just brilliant. And I really wish you a lot of support for finishing your book. I was taking little iPhone pictures of some of your slides. I'll keep those to myself. Don't worry about that. But the whole idea of the trench, and it really is, I've never heard of it explained so simply, but it really is just like the trench warfare of the First World War, where really nobody's going to win. And a lot of people, a lot of lives are lost in the struggle. And it was just a stalemate, and everybody accepted it. So the whole translator concept, which I've never heard articulated under that label, or maybe at all under any label, is such an important concept, I think, for us as Swedenborgians, because of our theology. And also, at least in the Swedenborgian church, from what I can gather, there's a lot of people devoted to trying to heal rather than continue the trench warfare. So I just love what you presented. I just learned a tremendous amount in the past hour, and just wanted to thank you for it.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah, right back here.
Thank you.
We'll go here, and we'll go there.
Okay. Yeah, thanks, Rich. Regarding trench warfare, I just want to add one more analogy that I've been using for a long time, that politics has been reduced pretty much to an athletic event. And the idea of an athletic event is you destroy the other side. And you scream and win and yell if you win, and you get really depressed and angry if you lose. I'm not thinking about the Celtics in particular right now. But I think there is a place for all of that. But we simplistically translate that attitude towards politics, I would say, over the last 40 years. It's been growing, and people are more and more accepting of that model and that paradigm for treating the opposite, those who differ from them. And there, I almost said it, the opposition. They're not opposites. They're all part of one life, one family. But you could picture, applying those principles to a family dynamic would be just murder, and just, that's the destruction of that unity. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I love the sports analogy because I'm not a big sports fan. I played sports, but I've never been a sports fan. My family's a sports fan, and it's always puzzled me that they will buy and sell players, move them to different cities, and they'll love them one day when they're on their team, on the Phillies, and next year that guy's traded, and he is horrible. They hate him. And so it's this, but that's a very, at the warrior level, I think sports get that out, particularly for men. It gets out a certain energy that they need that. But it's like, my family will be depressed if the Eagles lose. And I'm like, you had nothing in it. It's like, but I get it. Politics is like that now. We're just rooting for a team. It's all performative. Politicians coming to Washington aren't hiring policy staff. They're hiring PR staff because the game now is Twitter, PR, it's appearing on television shows, and it's just performative. Nobody's actually trying to do the work even of the game. But you're right, it's just exactly like a sports game. And one of the analogies, even worse, is it's become a coliseum, where we want to go into the coliseum and watch them chop each other up. And boy, it's all about, did you get your digs in on the other side? They are great. And that's now our criteria for a good politician, is how tough they are. Yeah, good point, Robert. One more, this will be our last.
That was a really good point about sports, because in this age of information overload and voices overload and opinions overload, all the information hitting us at once and no way to lessen it, It seems like we find ways to simplify, to find a place of respite and simplify our lives by having a yes, no, up, down binary situation. And unfortunately, it entrenches us to do that.
That's absolutely right. And all the science shows that when we are faced with a complex decision, we seek a binary decision as quickly
Right.
as we can just to put our head at ease. Complexity is more complicated. Obviously, nuance is complicated. So you're absolutely right.
Yeah.
You're absolutely right.
I was
We
won-
want binary.
I was wondering if it wouldn't be better to focus our desire for binaryism on what is the essential value in every situation and especially every conflict, which is ultimately love, and ultimately love coming from God. And to see possibly that when we are in conflict with someone's opinion or with someone personally, that perhaps it is that we don't recognize their ruling love or the love that is at essence in them that is from God, and that we have painted them with a broad brushstroke and not allowed ourselves to see God in them and to be able to open ourselves so that they can see our love as well. And once we do that, that binaryism becomes Unitarianism, and we are able to understand their point of view, in which if they see somebody's way of life or somebody's love as a threat to something that they love and something that they hold most dear, that it doesn't mean that. It doesn't mean we have to win at all cost. It means that there is something at root which we do have in common, and we just have to see what it is in each other.
Yeah, I think that's a beautiful insight, and it's very well said. And it makes me think that in situations when we are saying, those idiots, okay, they're morons, I just want to kill them, that is also a chance for spiritual reflection, to your point, to say, why is that? What in me is making their view, what am I so sure about? Yeah. And, and it just, the first step in all spiritual growth is awareness that comes through humility. And if we can just stop and say, why is this making, if I'm someone who's supposed to be loving and caring, why am I now in my mind really wanting to destroy them? Mm-hmm. and thrilled that they'll be destroyed? Mm-hmm. What's going on with me? And that's how evil works. Evil works by having us focus on the other. And that's why Jesus said, take this, the log out of your own eye, or you with sin cast the first stone, because evil always wants us to look out there and look at the idiots out there, but don't look in here. And our faith says, reflect, look within, change yourself. So I think it's a really great point.
And last Sunday, Reverend Lee at the church in San Francisco had a sermon about looking at the lies we tell ourselves and where they're from. And usually it's from fear of something or someone, something that threatens something we hold dear. And so that fear is where it prevents love from getting in.
Yes, and I think that was Julie's point when she was doing her chaplaincy, was that when she could see that they were afraid, and our teachings do say that fear is the instigator. Mm-hmm. When we get afraid, we want to lock in, we want to push them out. So that's an excellent point. Mm-hmm. So these are all really spiritual teachings, and that's one reason I'm involved with Braver Angels. I'm very close to these various groups. Without a spiritual dimension, I think a lot of these are not going to work. And a lot of the people involved are spiritual personally, and that's why it's working. But I think these teachings have to come in, and the modern culture just wants to solve everything mechanically. That's a weakness of modernity. If we just change this and that, we change gerrymandering and campaign finance laws, and we change the way votes are done, and everything's mechanical. But it's actually, this is a crisis of the heart, and it's a spiritual crisis, and therefore spiritual leaders have to rise up. So I really appreciate your point. I think in that, was there a question? Was there any question online?
It's on YouTube.
Oh, it's on YouTube? Okay, so if not, I think we're going to just wrap up now so people can get their lunch. Thank you so much for coming and for your attention and your questions.